This is your daily dose of all things royal.
Es kommt mir vor, als wäre unser Staatsbesuch in Deutschland 2023, der erste nach meiner Thronbesteigung, erst gestern gewesen. Bei diesem Besuch und bei früheren Besuchen haben Sie und Ihre verehrte Frau, meine Frau und mir viel Herzlichkeit gezeigt. Umso mehr freuen wir uns, dass wir Sie hier in Windsor als unsere Gäste begrüßen können. Dies zeigt die besondere Freundschaft, die unsere Länder verbindet. Our partnership continues to adapt to new times. We now find ourselves at the forefront of a global transformation. The search for a way of living that is at once prosperous, humane, and sustainable. Here, as elsewhere, Britain and Germany stand shoulder to shoulder, guided not only by technology and science, but by conscience.
When the gilded carriages rolled up to Windsor Castle and the royal salute echoed across the lawns, it wasn't just pomp and protocol. The guest this time was Frank Walter Steinmeier, the first German head of state to be formally welcomed with a UK state visit in 27 years. On the surface, a grand banquet, a Christmas tree glittering under 3,000 lights, 200-year-old silverware, tiaras and toasts, the full royal pageantry. All the things that remind the world that Britain still knows how to do soft power. But under the silver and chandeliers lay a far more urgent agenda, because this visit comes not in peace, but at a time when the post-Brexit chill between London and the continent, particularly Berlin, has begun to thaw. The UK and Germany have just signed the Kensington Treaty, a new pact pledging fresh cooperation on defense, trade, migration, and security. In the speeches that night, King Charles made more than polite toasts. There were veiled warnings, shared resolve, a public signal that Britain and Germany are aligning once again under a shared strategy, which is to defend against Russian aggression. Yesterday's grand banquet, with its regal glamour, actually becomes the stage for harder realities. And from what I gather, this state visit was about forging a defense partnership and loosening those post-Brexit tensions and a re-anchoring with UK in politics of continental Europe. What I'm seeing now are signs that dictator Starmer wants to pull the UK back into the EU. So this German state visit actually becomes political theater. It's a show of unity, sure, but also a deliberate recalibration of alliances. It says, we're coming back. We will face economic uncertainty together. We will respond to military threats together. We will rebuild bridges that Brexit tried to burn down. This state visit was symbolic and part of a strategic messaging. They're telling the world Britain and Germany are no longer drifting apart. We're aligning quietly, firmly, and urgently behind mutual interests and shared values. Of that being climate change and keeping the war going to maintain NATO's power and purpose. That's the real agenda behind the state banquet and this state visit, not just to honor tradition, but to reset geopolitics. And this is because in the United States, President Trump is pushing what he calls a peace deal for Europe, a proposal that, depending on the version that gets out, could involve pressuring Ukraine into concessions or reducing, and I think this is the most fearful thing for Europe right now, America's role as the primary guarantor of European security. To European leaders, this is making them very nervous. And this is the part where no one wants to say out loud. If the United States pulls back, then Europe needs to grow its own backbone. Because a Europe without secure American protection through NATO is a Europe that must tighten its own bonds, not only militarily, but also politically. Germany knows it, France knows it, and the UK knows this. I mean, just take a look earlier this year. What other state visits happened? We had France. We now have Germany. And then we also had the unprecedented second visit of Donald Trump. So, after years of distancing itself from the continent, Britain knows that it needs to do something. And that's why a German state visit, after 27 years of silence, is now happening. And in this changing landscape that we're now seeing, this slow, careful rewiring of European security, I don't know if this is coincidence or not, but something else is standing out to me. And that is what Prince Harry has been doing this year. We may think that Harry's been reduced to being a celebrity here in the United States who is technically outside of government. Yet, Harry repeatedly shows up in places that symbolically matter. Remember, earlier this year, he paid tribute to German veterans, a gesture that barely made headlines in the US, but landed with precision in Europe, not because of what he said, but because of when and where he said it. Now, I hate to say this, but it does seem like history is starting to repeat itself. Germany, after decades of caution and restrictions, is now rebuilding its military posture in response to the propaganda of Russian aggression. It's now stepping forward again as Europe's central defense power. Harry's tribute is not an accident. This state visit is not an accident. This is the normalization of Germany as a frontline defender of Europe. And the way that I see it, this is a message that the UK quietly supports because a stronger Germany means a stronger Europe and a more reliable partner if the United States shifts direction. We have to look at the GDP of Germany. It's got a lot of money. France doesn't have any money. The UK doesn't have any money. And as much as we can't stand Harry, this is really about symbolism and soft power and the emotional messaging. The kind of things royal figures are supposed to be uniquely positioned to deliver. I mean, literally, when you look at these two, soft power is effective. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, Harry still believes that he has this kind of influence. Who could forget Harry's 2 trips to Ukraine this year? On paper, they were humanitarian visits, support for wounded soldiers, a spotlight on resilience and recovery, so he says. But to European eyes, the policymakers in Brussels and Berlin and London, the meaning or the symbolism was unmistakable. Britain sending a royal signal of moral solidarity with Ukraine, not a political directive. We all know that the government was behind in supporting Harry on these trips. This is a cultural alignment, a reinforcement of narrative that Europe, not just NATO, not just Washington, stands with Kiev. Harry's presence tells a story that UK wants told. That's why he was there. That the war in Ukraine is not a distant conflict, that Europe has a stake in resisting authoritarian pressure, or at least that's the propaganda that's being pushed onto the world, that British identity is still tied to the defense of the continent. If we step outside our little bubble here, this is what soft power is supposed to look like in the language of so-called compassion. But it's carrying strategic undertones that subconsciously everyone understands. Is Harry's activity here part of the larger UK, Germany, Europe alignment? Not necessarily, I don't think so, but definitely in alignment with his family. In the realm of public perception and narrative building and cultural diplomacy, this is what the royals do best. His actions absolutely sit in the same direction as Britain's broader strategic messaging, affirming the danger of Russian aggression, supporting Ukraine's defense narrative, and showing moral unity with European allies. All 3 of those bullets were hit this year by Prince Harry. As we look at this a little bit deeper, Europe is indeed recalibrating its own defense posture. When you see a high-profile figure, granted, Prince Harry, showing visible support for European veterans, German veterans, and Ukrainian resilience, this is not some dumb PR stunt. This actually carries somewhat of symbolic weight. And this is where our little story turns inward now, towards the House of Windsor itself. Because as Europe redraws its security posturing, as Britain reconnects with Germany and France, the royal family's soft power suddenly becomes more valuable than it has been in decades. Why do you think Keir Starmer whipped out the letter from the king to give to Donald Trump at the White House? It's because they understand this kind of power, not because they control policy, but because they shape sentiment, pull on the heartstrings, they shape identity and international mood, the invisible forces that make foreign policy possible. And now, perhaps for the first time since the Cold War, the monarchy might be drifting back into the center of Europe's political theater. And the reason why the royal family matters here is that in moments of uncertainty, when alliances wobble, when Russia now is looming at the edge of the continent, European politics turns towards stability. And what does the royal family represent, or at least when the Queen was reigning? That was stability. People turn towards symbols that they trust, traditions that reassure, figures who stand above the electoral chaos. But as for Europe as a whole, there's only one monarchy that still has global cultural weight, and that is the British royal family. I think ever since Charles became king, I think some of that has been diminished as a result of seeing what Harry and Meghan have been doing over here and, understanding the agenda that's in play here and watching how the UK is pretty much falling down at this moment. But in theory, they're supposed to be predictable, safe, diplomatically neutral, yet emotionally resonant. That is why royal symbolism is now being quietly reactivated in this scenario with Germany, whether intentionally or simply allowed to unfold. And all of this really does lead to the underlying truth. And that's the royal family's cultural influence is an actual tool, intentionally or not, in what we see going on in geopolitics. Britain's political class may be divided, but the crown we've seen is consistent, and consistency is a currency Europe needs right now. And I know that there's a lot of people out there that don't think that the royal family get involved in politics, and I think a main reason as to why people say that is because they don't see it happening. The monarchy has a very big role in politics, and they are seen as stabilizing instruments of geopolitics, not as decision makers or anything like that, and not as policymakers either, but as the emotional architects supporting Britain's strategic direction. That's why the king's always having meetings with the prime minister. For decades, up until the Queen's passing, the royal family floated above politics, dutifully neutral, waving from balconies and hosting those garden parties. When Europe is facing the most significant security realignment since the fall of the Soviet Union, symbolic institutions gain a certain new importance. And so the monarchy, without having to change a single law, begins to shift now its position. Yeah, I think we've been seeing that there are more high-profile state visits, there are more conscious historical reconciliation gestures, right? More subtle reinforcements of European unity narratives. Every state visit, King Charles talks about coming together. More humanitarian and veteran-focused appearances that dovetail with defense priorities, right? Invictus Games. The public sees the charity work. The leaders, they see the messaging. And because the crown's genius has always been the same, it carries political meaning without ever speaking in political language. And this is why the public has this perception that the royal family is not involved in politics and has no idea that this is actually happening. The monarchy works through symbolism, not statements. And what this is really about is this transformation. And King Charles does say that in his speech with Germany, without having to announce it and debate it, without the public fully noticing it. The royal family is becoming a symbolic guarantor of Europe's stability during a time where, rightfully so, there's geopolitical uncertainty. Now, as we see the royal family repositioning itself, it's natural to think, well, what about the growing chasm happening at home? Britons are asking, why does the monarchy speak boldly about global threats and humanitarian crises abroad, yet remain largely silent on systemic failures that allowed children to be harmed in their own towns? Why are borders so porous? Why are communities left unprotected? Why is the Christian moral framework of the nation overlooked while the Crown champions global agendas like Agenda 2030 and the UN Sustainable Development Goals? These are not abstract questions, they're lived realities. I mean, children were abused, families have been devastated. Communities do feel abandoned, and no amount of pageantry, treaties, or global diplomacy can erase that injustice. And yet, the monarchy continues to project influence internationally. King Charles advocates for climate action and global cooperation, and Harry emphasizes resilience and humanitarian values. But the British people are left wondering whose priorities are being defended. The children at home, or the global agenda that positions Britain as a moral actor abroad? Britain is indeed at a crossroads. Globally, it reasserts itself as a defender of Europe and liberal values, but domestically, it struggles to confront failures in protecting its own citizens. The monarchy, with its soft power and cultural influence, is uniquely positioned to bridge that divide if it chooses to act decisively. And now the question everyone is asking, why won't the monarch defend its own people? And I think because the truth is not simple. King Charles inherited this role. By design, he is constrained. The crown is supposed to be symbolic and bound by constitutional conventions and traditionally refrains from interfering in the day-to-day business of government. But going back to what I was saying earlier, symbolism carries weight, and many Britons feel that right now, where they place their symbolism has been misapplied. For decades, the monarchy has prioritized soft power abroad, building those international alliances and championing humanitarian causes, promoting global agendas like Agenda 2030 and the UN SDG goals. But at home, citizens see a very different reality. There is this sense that ordinary Britons are left vulnerable while attention is given to global issues and symbolic diplomacy. This isn't simply negligence, it's a structural choice, a prioritization of international prestige over domestic protection. The monarchy operates in a world where public criticism of government policy must be muted. Intervention in domestic crises risks breaking centuries of constitutional convention. But that very restraint now feels like abandonment to the people who are suffering the most. The tension is real. I mean, we see it every day. Britain's institutions are meant to protect citizens, yet the monarchy's influence is being exercised mainly externally, shaping alliances and perceptions and global narratives. Meanwhile, citizens feel increasingly unsafe in their own country. And that is why frustration is boiling over. The Crown has enormous moral authority, even if it cannot legislate. It could, if it chose, wield soft power to push for accountability. They could also push to demand justice for victims and to publicly champion the protection of British citizens at bare minimum. Instead, the monarchy maintains a delicate neutrality, emphasizing global unity while leaving many to ask, are our own children, our own families, our own neighborhoods secondary to the international image of Britain as a moral actor? And the answer, for millions of Britons, feels painfully clear. For too long, yes. The erosion of freedoms, the lack of protection, the delayed justice, these are not accidents. They are the product of a system where global symbolism and international prestige have, in practice, outweighed the immediate moral duty to defend citizens at home. From the perspective of ordinary Britons, the Crown's moral and cultural weight is being used to advance global causes. Full stop. Domestic crises, child exploitation, crime, immigration pressures, erosion of civil liberties remain insufficiently addressed. The soft power projected overseas indirectly normalizes the very policies that critics see as stripping freedoms, promoting censorship, and undermining local authority. In effect, Prince Harry's interventions here in the United States serve as a mirror of the UK's domestic neglect. While Britain struggles to safeguard its people and its values, its royal emissaries champion a globalist agenda that sometimes contradicts the immediate interests and freedoms of its own citizens, like freedom of speech. The public has been repeatedly told that Prince Harry is a private citizen, acting independently, with no obligations, no influence, and no connection to the institution he left behind. But when you examine his behavior, as we have in detail on this channel, his access and the way global institutions treat him, those narratives that the media fed us all fall apart. If Harry were truly cut loose, he would not have state-level security considerations in multiple countries. He would not receive special diplomatic-style handling during his international travels. His meetings with foreign leaders would be scrutinized or blocked. Instead, they're allowed to continue quietly. He would not be given platforms from the UN to prestigious global summits, and he would not be shielded from accountability in the UK courts regarding immigration and security privileges. He certainly wouldn't be able to insert himself into US politics with zero pushback.
We're clearly obsessed with royalty, so why not?
Hold on. Look, I wouldn't say we're obsessed with royalty.
Really? I heard you elected a king.
This is not the profile of a private citizen. This is the profile of a soft power asset, still functioning within a protected bubble, whether formally or informally connected to the crown. And we'd be stupid to think otherwise. So, I think many of us ask, who is protecting Prince Harry? Because it clearly isn't just PR teams or Hollywood lawyers. There is a level of institutional silence, both from the United Kingdom and the United States, that defies his official story. If a private American celebrity attacked U.S. political figures like our president and advocated for censorship ideologies and meddled in elections through indirect messaging and participated in global governance events, you know that the backlash would be fierce. Yet Harry somehow sails through untouched? That does not happen without state-level tolerance. And if you really think about it, Harry's actions align perfectly with the Crown's modern soft power strategy. The monarchy today is less about domestic governance and more about international influence. It's diplomacy by celebrity and trying to shape values abroad by embedding British prestige in not only the United States, but also global institutions, while reinforcing transatlantic elite networks. Harry plays directly into this. He is an ideal vehicle for influencing American liberal institutions because he arrives with the royal prestige, the victim branding, the Hollywood backing, the media protection, the illusion of independence. That gives him more soft power freedom than a working royal could ever have. And that's the critical point. Whether or not Harry is officially working for the crown, he is clearly functioning within the strategic interests of the crown's global partners, the Democrat elites, UN-related networks, philanthropic power circles, tech censorship alliances, and the transatlantic establishment. Do I think that Harry's still connected to the crown? Absolutely. Will we ever find out? Probably not. Americans like myself ask why our political system is being influenced by foreign soft power. And why is it that Harry continues to keep operating untouched? He's like a man without accountability, but with immense influence and access. Which leaves me with this final question for you. If Harry is not working for the crown, then who exactly is he working for? Because someone, somewhere, is benefiting from the chaos he and Meghan generate. And it's certainly not the ordinary citizens of the UK or America. What do you guys think? Definitely leave your thoughts below. As always, I will be back with more content, but until then, please be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Such a fraud.